This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Squarespace.
Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and today we are talking World of Warcraft Shadowlands patch 9.3 and why it doesn't exist, why it will never exist, and how it kind of actually will exist? Okay, allow me to explain. The year 2021 has been a very sad year for World of Warcraft overall. Even if you forget about all the shameful revelations about how Blizzards, and in particular Team 2 who make WoW, treat their employees, which is a big if, and you shouldn't, frankly, and you're just talking about the game and the content, then it's still been a sad year. A year in which it turns out current expansion Shadowlands has only received one major content patch in the entire year. And this for a game that released at the tail end of last year too. Like 2021 was not meant to be Shadowlands winding down into a comfy final tier kind of year, you know? It's unprecedented for a new expansion to be this neglected in the year following its release, and as a result, that Shadowlands content, which I still consider good content overall personally, but that's not what this video is about, don't worry, has inevitably gone stale. Every flaw has had its importance and impact and annoyingness magnified over time, and you know, it's inevitably got a little bit boring. Players have understandably started looking elsewhere for their fantasy MMO fix. It's just all been, you know, very sad. Now look, obviously there is one pretty big, unmistakable reason why the patch scheduling of Shadowlands has been so sparse, one which it would be kind of disingenuous not to acknowledge. But however understandable you consider the delays to the content rollout to be or not to be in 2021, the fact remains that by any measure, Blizz are way behind schedule, and whatever their original plans for the expansion were, one major patch all year, all year probably wasn't it, which presents something of a problem. Well, no one playing the game, obviously, that's a pretty big problem, but also Blizzard's established schedule in the modern WoW era, a comfortable and popular model roadmap of content rollout which the Shadowlands delays have put us way off of course from. I am talking, of course, of the 2-year cycle. If the classic era of WoW is vanilla through to Wrath, middle era being Cataclysm and Mists of Pandaria, I think the modern era of WoW expansions began from Warlords of Draenor onwards. And although Warlords is very much a transitional expansion, which really straddles the two eras, it's where a lot of the foundations of the modern game and the way it plays and the schedule it keeps were laid, with Legion being the game that really solidified the modern WoW experience, and which has been essentially recreated ever since. Basically, there are things we now expect from a modern WoW expansion release schedule, namely a release in the second half of the year, with content rollout over the course of the next 2 years in the form of 3 major patches containing new raids, dungeons, zones, story quests, and evolutions of major gameplay features. These are your point 1, point 2, and point 3 patches, punctuated by smaller point 5 patches which deal with tuning, quality of life, and much smaller content updates. In the middle of all of that, a year after expansion release, we expect an announcement of the next expansion at the relevant BlizzCon. It's a schedule that we are all so familiar with that we even know precisely what kind of content to expect in each numbered patch, and how the content that we might look forward to in a point 1 patch would differ from that of a point 2 patch. We understand that it's clearly how Blizzard like to do it, and understandably so. As any content creator knows, keeping to a regular schedule is just as an important part of the process as the finished product itself, which is why we at T&E, okay, it's all starting to make sense now. That's how we got Legion, that's how we got BFA, that's the neat little package we were expecting Shadowlands to come wrapped in, and it's almost certainly how Blizz intended to deliver it before everything went wrong. And here's the thing, right? I'm recording this video right at the end of September 2021, which means if we were keeping to the established modern WoW schedule, then right now we would all be getting excited about a new expansion reveal in under a month and a half at BlizzCon in November, which seems wild to even think about, as instead we all sit here wondering if there's going to be a 9.2 announcement before the end of the year. And it means at this stage, Blizzard basically have two options. Either they just go ahead and say, no, we planned the expansion for this many patches, and this is exactly what we will deliver, even if it takes a year longer than originally planned. And if our sub numbers tank in that long wait, well, then that is a price worth paying for our artistic and creative integrity. Or they skip one of those major patches, make Shadowlands a 2-patch expansion, and deliver 10.0, probably still late, let's be honest, but not as late. And I think I know which they'll choose. I think you know which they'll choose. And the prevailing opinion in the community certainly seems to be that Shadowlands, in terms of patch content, if not length in time, is going to be cut short, which means no patch 9.3, fam. No equivalent of Argus in Legion. No equivalent of Nyalotha in BFA. A major culminating point in the expansion gone. And I'm here to say, yes, that is correct. And also, no, that is wrong. Because I think there's pretty strong evidence to suggest that the patch skip has already happened. That the content that needed to be skipped to correct course and get vaguely back on schedule has already been cut. And that the compromises with story and updates have already been made, meaning that what's left to come of Shadowlands is actually exactly what the devs had planned in the first place. Okay, allow me to explain some more. Because, famously, we've been here before. Warlords of Draenor was, in many ways, a stunning expansion, a cool opening, an exciting and lore-rich leveling experience, decent class design, and one especially banging raid, but in most other departments, an absolute abject failure. Garrisons satisfied precisely no one's itch for player housing and turned into an antisocial mandatory grind of herb and ore mining. None of the story felt especially impactful because of that pesky alternative universe setting. Oh no, Velen's dead! Oh no, that's terrible! Oh wait, that's not my Velen? Just be clear, my Velen is okay? Well, that's fine then. Who cares? This guy can die as much as he likes. I don't give a shit. There was huge drama over the lack of flying. Its first major patch was a complete letdown content-wise, and by Blizzard's own admission should never have been sold as a 0.1 patch at all, and there just wasn't much to do. To the extent that Blizz decided the best course of action would be to essentially abandon the expansion halfway through and focus their efforts on making Legion the best that it could possibly be, which you'd have to say, you know, fair play, mission successful on that one in my opinion. Now in WoD's case, Blizzard's method for truncating the expansion was just to lop out the whole middle section. It's generally well known now that there was originally a planned Shatrath raid, much more character development of Yrel, and obviously progression of the story of the Iron Horde and their relationship with Gul'dan in particular. But on the face of it, it makes sense, you know, if you're going to cut something, cut the middle bit, because then you still have the end bit to wrap up the story and lead into the next expansion. In WoD's case though, as was the case with so much in WoD, this didn't really work. When patch 6.2, the Fury of Hellfire, hit with the arrival of the Legion in Tanan Jungle and the Iron Horde basically decimated suddenly, and Grom, the guy who kind of genocided the Draenei and who we have been fighting against because he wants to take over our world and enslave our world because he is bad, like that is literally why we are here doing all the fighting and that. Grom, who is captured by Gul'dan, and then in the Hellfire raid, we set him free as we're passing through, and he's on our side now, and we are okay with that, and the Draenei are okay with that. Gromash Hellscream gains redemption and forgiveness by being rescued. That's his whole redemption arc. He gets rescued by us, and that's why we forgive him for the genocide and attempted invasion and all the murder and war and stuff, which, by the way, he has never apologized, let alone atoned for in any way. Yeah, anyway, they cut the middle out of WoD, and that's why the whole last patch plays weird and makes the Game of Thrones finale look like a masterpiece of character consistency. So, if Shadowlands needs to pull the same trick, isn't the danger that they will repeat the same mistakes? Well, no. Because whereas I think most of us would agree that 9.2 will be the final patch of the current adventure, just as 6.2 was the last major update of WoD, it seems pretty clear to me that Shadowlands is taking a very different approach to how it powers through the rest of the expansion. Based on the evidence that I will present, I posit that with 9.1 Chains of Domination, Blizzard have already combined the major plot, gameplay, and features that they had planned for both patches 9.1 and 9.2, meaning that when the real 9.2 does eventually come, it will essentially contain what the team had always planned for 9.3 in pretty much its entirety, keeping the consistency in storytelling and gameplay progression that WoD absolutely lacked. And I think there's some very compelling evidence for this. For a start, you only have to look at the features of Chains of Domination. I think to many players, Chains doesn't feel like a truly huge patch, and that is totally understandable because frankly, the longer a patch is delayed, the longer a content drought you've lived through, the bigger and better a patch has to be to justify that wait when it eventually arrives. And since 9.1 was the longest we have ever waited for a 0.1 patch, it has a lot more work to do to win us all over. That's understandable. That's human psychology right there. I am very intelligent. But if you look at the features in Chains of Domination, it contains things that we've come to expect and demand from a modern 0.1 patch, but also most of the features that we'd come to expect from a 0.2 patch as well. And to better express my point, because I'm a very visual learner, maybe you are too, I have made this handy spreadsheet, because if there's one thing I love, it's being right about stuff. But if there's another thing I love, it's making a spreadsheet to prove it. So here you can see I have separated out the 0.1 and 0.2 patches of the last 4 expansions and the major content updates that came with them. Color coded, of course, because I love this shit. Raid, Mega Dungeon, Mini Raid, Assaults, New Zone Area, Flying, and just a plain old dungeon. And for clarity's sake, I'm including major content from 0.5 patches as part of that main patch. So if a raid actually released in 7.1.5, I'm counting that as 7.1 content, because for the purposes of this discussion, it is. Good. So with that established, let's take a look at where we would normally expect these features to pop up in the patch cycle. Starting with Warlords, where patch 6.1 had literally none of them, because that was the selfie cam patch. Look, I said WOD was a transitional expansion, okay? But 6.2 had the Hellfire Citadel Raid, Tanan Jungle New Zone Area, and Flying unlocked. Don't worry, I'm not going to say all of them like that. I'm just making a point. Legion patch 7.1 had the Nighthold Raid, the Karazhan Mega Dungeon, and the Trial of Valor Mini Raid. And yes, I know what you're thinking, and I agree. Legion. And then 7.2 had a raid, Tomb of Sargeras, a new zone in the Broken Shore, Flying unlocked, a new dungeon, Cathedral of Never Queued for it, and the introduction of a new feature, Legion Assaults, special world quest events on a timer in rotating zones, something that has stayed in the game ever since. And yes, I'm sure you noticed it too. Legion was so good. But also, thanks to my handy color coding, we can see that 7.2 shared a lot more in common with 6.2 in terms of features than 7.1 did. Already a pattern of what features we expect from each patch is emerging. Battle for Azeroth patch 8.1. A raid, of course, Battle for Dazara Lore, banger. It had a mini raid, Crucible of Storms, and it had zone assaults, a patch earlier than the Legion equivalent. The criminally underrated 8.2 had the Eternal Palace raid, the Nazjatar zone, the Mechagon zone, Flying, and the Mechagon Mega Dungeon. And again, there are clear patterns emerging around what constitutes 0.1 features and what is generally a 0.2 thing. Which leads us to Shadowlands Chains of Domination, which has the Sanctum of Domination raid, it has Covenant Maw assaults, it has the new zone area of Korthia, it unlocked Flying, and it gave us the Mega Dungeon of Tazavesh, which means in terms of features, it draws from the 0.1 and 0.2 columns, which until this point have stayed pretty distinct. Most notably, the new zone and the Flying unlock are things that we would strongly associate with a 0.2 patch. And from this comparison, it is not hard to imagine Chains of Domination as a combination of planned features for 2 separate patches combined into one. It's not hard to imagine how in the normal schedule, a 9.1 which releases just a couple of months after Shadowlands does, as it should, might happily have seen the Covenants pressing the attack on the Maw with the Covenant assaults, maybe with Tazavesh popping up too, while Korthia and Flying and the Sanctum of Domination raid with its climactic Jailer and Arbiter drama was set to be delivered with a 9.2. And not only that, but the story progression of Chains very much suggests that as well. The existing 9.1 ends on the kind of note that you would expect from a 0.2 patch, as in everything has changed. The next installment is going to be very different from what has come before. In Legions, 7.2 ended with us basically defeating the demon invasion on Azeroth and looking to the stars ahead of a 0.3 patch that would take us to a literal different planet. 8.2 ended with the release of N'Zoth and the death of Saurfang, leading into the N'Zoth evasion and a trip to Nyalotha in the next patch, and Chains of Domination's climax, with the Jailer regaining his power tower and escaping the moor in a shiny portal that leads somewhere cool and shiny to try and initiate Reality's End, leaving Sylvanas in our custody, feels very much like that, rather than the lower key 0.1 patch endings. And so yeah, I genuinely think that Chains of Domination is Blizzard's attempt to get some way back on schedule for Shadowlands by combining much of what they had planned for the original 9.1 and 9.2 into one update. And if that is the case, if to all intents and purposes we are on the planned 9.2 patch right now and waiting for what is practically 9.3, then yeah, we are pretty much back on schedule, so well done. But of course, although this is a much smoother way of achieving the goal than WoD's shit show, it's not a lossless process, is it? We may have retained the main story beats and every type of feature, but we have unquestionably lost content by doing this, as we can see from our chart.
Hey guys, I am yet again here to tell you about our brand spanking new website, which I built with nothing but sheer force of my own will and these two hands and the help of Squarespace, who are very generously sponsoring today's video. So after having some fun with Squarespace's nifty embedding tools, we are finally giving you what I think you're here and what you've been here for all along, the official T&E one photo of Idris Elba per day mailing list, made possible by my own two hands and Squarespace's really good mailing list integration feature, which I highly recommend. I'm pleased to share that literally no one who has signed up to this mailing list has unsubscribed from it yet, although if you really needed to, you could just click the unsubscribe button and Squarespace will handle all the rest for you. So thanks, Squarespace, I guess. But it's really important to me that you, people of the internet, know that we hear you, we are listening, and we are taking all of your feedback on board because we want to make this the best possible game and mailing list it can be. So I am pleased to tell you that here at T&E HQ, we have decided to pull the ripcord. We have heard your cries that one photo of Idris Elba per day is simply not enough photos per day. So we are no longer going to be time gating this essential content from now. Okay, so we've heard your further feedback that more than one photo of Idris Elba per day was literally frying your graphics cards. Thankfully, Squarespace has all the tools to let you manage email campaigns on the go at any point, literally with the press of a button. It is so simple that even I can do it. And ensuring that everyone can experience our mailing list safely and without destroying your PCs. And here it is. And now that you've had a bite of the cherry, why not make your own website? For a free trial and 10% off your first purchase, just go to squarespace.com/Taliesin Evitel or use the link in the description below. That's squarespace.com/Taliesin Evitel. Go bananas.
I think Sanctum of Domination would almost certainly have been the original 9.2 raid, which means that we have lost whatever the planned 9.1 raid was. If previous expansions are anything to go by, it's reasonable to imagine that we might have lost a mini raid as well. And although I'd be surprised if there was ever a new dungeon like Cathedral planned, it is also possible, I suppose. We definitely lost story campaign quests along the way as well. And I think on balance, Chains of Domination is probably more planned 9.2 than planned 9.1, you know? And it's kind of impossible not to tantalizingly speculate as to what those lost content updates would have looked like. What was the missing raid and mini raid and story of Shadowlands? I think personally that it's very likely the story content that we lack would have been for the planned 9.1 and would have involved the Covenants banding together, attacking the Moor in Covenant assaults, obviously, and realizing that the jailer is after the Covenant sigils as part of his escape plan. The sigils suddenly being a big thing in Chains of Domination does kind of come out of nowhere a bit, and it makes sense that would have been the focus for any cut stuff. Raid-wise, I've always thought House of the Chosen is just such a big enemy-filled area with such an obviously loose thread in Vryaz that needed sorting, and that having basically ended the Anima Drought, the Covenants banding together to take back control of the official Shadowlands army would seem seem like a logical next step. Or it could have been some version of what eventually became the Battle for Ardenweald scenario, which opened Chains of Domination, ending in the Winter Queen unbelievably having her sigils stolen from the incredibly safe place of her unguarded actual house, which obviously should be the last place anyone would think to look for it, right? Having the sigils introduced earlier would certainly have been a smoother transition to them being so important in Chains. It would have made the already brilliant opening cinematic of Chains of Domination that much more impactful, because we would have known what this thing was. And so that would be my guess, but of course it's all just speculation until someone leaves Blizzard in like a year or two and just basically tells us. So if Chains of Domination really is the first two planned major updates of Shadowlands combined, and I think it is, and if we really are now in a position where we can expect the planned final patch in its entirety, just as a 0.2 instead of a 0.3, what is the schedule for the rest of Shadowlands? Well, I'm glad you asked. With 9.15 on the PTR as I speak, a patch which, by the way, introduces the kind of currency and progress catch-ups that you would usually associate from a 2.5 patch, and yeah, I think a lot of that is the fact that everyone's playing other games right now, but I think it is definitely evidence for our theory too. I think most players expect it to be going live around late October or early November, and if that is the case, then I would very strongly expect a 9.1 reveal announcement, you know the sort, Jeremy Fiesel in a dark room being very cheerful and likable, before the end of this year to release in the first or maybe second quarter of 2022. And this of course will be a 0.2 that will absolutely fit the mold of a modern 0.3 patch. Whole new environment and objective, the culmination of the whole expansion story and leading into the next. In this case, I guess the jailer trying to unmake reality, using some awesome MacGuffin that he had hidden in a secret zone, which is where he is now. Anduin's resolution, Sylvanas' big whatever happens to her, maybe a shift into setting the stage for an intergalactic disco war, who knows? And if that happens, then the way is clear for, I don't know, if there were to be a BlizzCon line around February time, like there was this year, for a new WoW expansion to be announced then, which would put us 3 months behind the usual schedule. Not bad at all. I wouldn't be surprised, but I would be delighted. I'd probably be less surprised if it all took a fair bit longer than that, because basically, it always does, doesn't it? And whereas this timeline wouldn't make up for the painful length of time between patches in Shadowlands, whereas it doesn't solve any of the problems that the game may or may not have, it would be an undoubtedly pretty impressive feat from a team on the back foot who are trying to get things schedule-wise back on track. Anyway, we'll probably find out that I'm totally wrong actually, and there totally will be a 9.3, and Shadowlands will be the first 5-year Warcraft expansion. So I look forward to that discussion. But in the meantime, thank you for joining us today. This video is a subject that I find myself discussing quite a lot on stream, and I just thought it would be really interesting to dive in a little bit deeper to it here. So if you enjoyed this video, don't thank me, thank our Twitch chat, and thank our patrons who give their actual real life money to make all of our work happen. And guys, seriously, thank you, no joke, because without you, there would be a whole lot less Taliesin Evitel. If you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it, and remember, my name is Gen Eric Live. No, my name is Taliesin from me and Evitel and Anirin. Oh, we don't have time for Evitel and Anirin. We'll combine them into Evirin, Aniratel 2. Cheerio.